I never thought a smile from my friend's mom could change everything, but then she whispered, "Promise me, this will be our little secret." The first time I noticed her, it was nothing extraordinary, just another Saturday afternoon, the kind I'd spent countless times at my friend's house. I had walked in, kicked off my shoes at the doorway, and was greeted by the familiar smell of home, faint vanilla from the candles she kept on the living room table, mingled with the earthy scent of the garden outside. She was standing near the kitchen counter, casually flipping through a magazine. But in that ordinary moment, she caught my attention. Maybe it was the way the sunlight caught her hair, the soft warmth of her presence, or the quiet grace in the way she moved. She wasn't just beautiful, though she was, but there was something in her that felt like a story I hadn't yet discovered. When she looked up and smiled, the room seemed to pause for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a smile meant for anyone in particular, not my friend, not me, yet it landed squarely on me, unspoken and knowing. My heartbeat picked up before I even realized it, a subtle, fluttering awareness that I couldn't ignore. I noticed the gentle crinkle near her eyes, the way her lips curved naturally, as if her warmth radiated effortlessly without thought. I tried to focus on my friend, greeting him loudly, but my attention kept drifting. She caught me glancing, and for a moment, our eyes met again. Her gaze wasn't lingering in a way that was improper, it was curious, almost amused, and it carried a softness that made me want to linger in that moment indefinitely. It was a glance that seemed to say more than words could, a quiet acknowledgement, an invisible thread connecting us without a single syllable exchanged. Even as I moved toward the living room, the subtle impression stayed with me. The slight sway in her posture, the careful way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the low hum of a song she was humming quietly to herself, all of it etched itself into my awareness. I couldn't help but feel that beneath the ordinary setting of suburban comfort, there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, something that might grow if I paid attention. That was the moment it started, the unexpected spark, soft and unassuming, but electric enough to make me hyper-aware of every detail, the way her presence filled the space, how her voice carried even in casual conversation, and the quiet way she made ordinary moments feel charged. Little did I know then, that smile, that fleeting glance, would be the beginning of a connection that neither of us could ignore. It was one of those afternoons when everything felt unusually calm. I had offered to help carry groceries inside after my friend's mom had come back from the store, and what should have been a simple, mundane task became something charged with subtle significance. She handed me the first bag, and our fingers brushed. It was a fleeting touch, almost accidental, but enough to send a tiny shiver down my spine. She laughed softly at something my friend said from the living room, and I noticed the way her laughter seemed to ripple through the room, warm and genuine. The sound lingered longer than it should have, settling over me in a way that made the air feel different, heavier in the best possible way. When I looked at her, I realized I had been staring, and her eyes met mine for the briefest of seconds. There was curiosity there, and maybe a hint of amusement, but it wasn't pointed or inappropriate, just quietly engaging, almost conspiratorial, like we shared a secret I wasn't supposed to understand yet. We moved together in the kitchen, arranging the groceries on the counter, our proximity closer than necessary. Each movement was ordinary, yet charged with the weight of unspoken awareness. Her shoulder brushed mine as she reached for a can of tomatoes, and the warmth of that contact lingered. I caught myself noticing the faint scent of her perfume, floral, comforting, vaguely sweet, and how it blended with the smells of fresh bread and ripe fruit on the counter. She commented on something trivial, the way she always did, a casual remark about the ripeness of the bananas, and I realized I was hanging on every word. Not because it was important, but because I wanted to hear her voice, wanted to trace the rhythm of her speech and the way her expressions subtly shifted with each sentence. It was as if every ordinary moment she shared contained a hidden layer, something intimate that only I was attuned to. By the time we finished unpacking, there was a quiet intimacy between us that hadn't existed when I arrived. It wasn't spoken, there were no confessions, no overt signals, but I felt it in the lingering glances, the gentle proximity, and the small touches that seemed to stretch just long enough to be felt without being noticed. As I left the kitchen and went to join my friend, I carried with me the warmth of that afternoon, the soft brush of hands, the lingering laughter, the faint fragrance of her presence. Every simple, quiet gesture had left its mark, and I realized that this connection, subtle and delicate, was slowly starting to root itself in a way I couldn't ignore. The house had quieted down by late afternoon, my friend having retreated to his room for a video call. It was just the two of us in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional bird outside the window filling the spaces between words. For a moment, I felt a rare sense of stillness, a pause from the chaos of life, and it gave her the courage to speak in a softer, more personal tone. "I haven't always lived in this house," she began, her fingers tracing the edge of a coffee mug almost absent-mindedly. Her eyes, a little distant, hinted at memories she wasn't used to sharing with anyone younger than herself. She spoke of a move she had made years ago, of challenges she had faced quietly, and of small victories no one noticed but her. Her voice was steady, yet there was an undercurrent of vulnerability that made me lean in slightly, as if the space between us could somehow make her words more tangible, more real. I listened, captivated not only by her story but by the way she told it, with restraint, grace, and an honesty that left no room for pretense. She wasn't asking for sympathy, she was simply letting me in, letting me see a side of her that rarely existed outside these quiet corners of her life. I realized then that she trusted me in a way that surprised me, and it stirred a deep sense of admiration I hadn't fully acknowledged before. At one point, her hand brushed against my shoulder as she reached for the sugar container. It was casual enough to seem ordinary, yet in that fleeting contact I felt an unspoken connection. My pulse quickened for reasons I couldn't name, and I noticed the warmth of her touch lingering on my skin long after she had moved. It wasn't a spark of romance yet, it was something subtler, more profound, the awareness that she had allowed me into her world, even if just for a few moments. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh coffee and cinnamon from the morning pastries she had baked, mingling with the quiet intimacy of her presence. Each gesture, the way she tilted her head while speaking, the small pauses she took before choosing her words, the subtle sighs that punctuated her sentences, made the afternoon feel suspended, almost sacred. When she finally fell silent, I realized we had shared something extraordinary in its simplicity, a quiet, unspoken bond that transcended age, circumstance, and expectation. I wasn't just listening to her story, I was being invited into the gentle rhythm of her life. And in that invitation, I felt the first real weight of connection, a tether between us that neither words nor time could easily sever. Evenings at my friend's house carried a different kind of energy. The chatter of the day faded, replaced by the gentle hum of the television and the soft shuffle of feet on carpeted floors. My friend was absorbed in a video game in his room, leaving me alone with his mom in the living room for what felt like the first time that truly mattered. We settled on the couch to watch a show, the faint glow of the screen illuminating her features. She leaned back casually, yet there was an ease to her posture that felt natural and inviting. Our knees brushed lightly as we adjusted our positions, a simple touch that sent a small thrill through me I couldn't ignore. It wasn't intentional, not exactly, just a matter of proximity, but the spark it created was undeniable. I became acutely aware of how close we were, how ordinary movements could carry a charge I hadn't anticipated. At one point, reaching simultaneously for a bowl of popcorn, our hands collided. We laughed softly, a little breathless from the unexpected contact, and our eyes met in a way that neither of us could easily dismiss. Her gaze lingered, thoughtful, almost mischievous, and I felt the slow, steady pull of something I hadn't named yet. There was curiosity there, yes, but also a quiet awareness, a recognition of tension neither of us wanted to address aloud. As the show played on, small gestures began to feel heavier with unspoken meaning. The way she shifted to hand me the remote, the casual brush of her fingers against mine, even the simple exchange of smiles during a funny scene, all of it felt amplified, intimate in a way that was both exciting and slightly unsettling. My mind was acutely aware of her presence, the soft scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her, the subtle rhythm of her breathing in the quiet room. I caught myself stealing glances, studying the delicate lines of her expression, the way her eyes reflected the screen's light, the subtle curve of her smile. Every ordinary moment seemed laden with possibility, yet there was restraint on both sides, a careful dance of closeness and distance. The tension wasn't urgent, it wasn't needful. It was quiet, deliberate, and electric, a slow-burning flame beneath the surface of everyday life. By the time my friend returned to the room, the tension hadn't been resolved, and that was precisely the point. There was anticipation now, a fragile thread connecting us that pulsed quietly in every glance, every brush of skin, every shared laugh. It was an unspoken promise of more, not necessarily tomorrow, or the next day, but in time, when the world allowed it. And even in its subtlety, the feeling was undeniable. This connection, fragile yet insistent, was changing everything. That evening, the house felt unusually still. My friend had gone out to meet some classmates, leaving me alone with his mom for the first time without interruptions. The quiet was different this time, softer, more intimate, as if the world had shrunk down to the two of us. I was sitting at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring my drink, when she appeared in the doorway, holding a folded towel. Her presence filled the space in a way I hadn't realized until that moment. She leaned casually against the counter, and as I looked up, our eyes met. There was something in her gaze, gentle, knowing, almost conspiratorial, that made my chest tighten. She stepped closer, just enough to be near, and in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "Promise me, this will be our little secret." Time seemed to slow. The words, simple as they were, carried a weight I couldn't have anticipated. My heart thudded loudly, each beat echoing in my ears. It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it, the softness of her tone, the quiet intensity in her eyes, the gentle brush of her hand as she handed me the towel. The air between us felt charged, a mix of warmth, curiosity, and a hint of something unspoken. I realized then that the secrecy itself amplified the intimacy. It wasn't about hiding anything shameful, it was about a quiet understanding, a shared trust that this moment belonged only to us. Every subtle gesture, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the towel, the faint tilt of her head as she looked at me, the almost imperceptible smile tugging at her lips, communicated more than words could. I wanted to speak, to assure her, to say something that matched the weight of her request, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I nodded, letting my eyes meet hers, silently promising to honor that unspoken agreement. The brief contact of her hand against mine as she turned to leave left a lingering warmth, a physical echo of the emotional closeness that had just formed. Even after she walked away, the room seemed charged with the quiet residue of that moment. I could still feel the tremor of anticipation, the pulse of something delicate yet intense, and the undeniable awareness that nothing would ever feel entirely ordinary again. That single whispered sentence, our little secret, had transformed the familiar into something electric, setting the stage for an intimacy neither of us had fully acknowledged but both understood. It was more than a promise, it was the beginning of a connection that would grow, quietly, deliberately, in ways that words alone could never capture. Later that evening, the house was wrapped in a calm that only comes after a long day. My friend had gone to bed early, leaving me alone once more with his mom. We ended up in the garden, the soft glow of the porch light casting gentle shadows over the flowers and neatly trimmed lawn. The air was cool, scented faintly with lavender from the small plants she tended carefully every weekend. There was a quiet intimacy in that setting, the kind that invited honesty and slowed the world down around us. We sat on the bench side by side, close enough that our shoulders brushed occasionally. The comfort of proximity was immediate, yet neither of us rushed to fill the silence. It was a silence heavy with possibility, the kind that allowed thoughts and feelings to surface naturally. Eventually, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I've always liked how observant you are," she admitted, a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "You notice things most people overlook. And you listen, really listen. It's rare." Her words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. I wanted to tell her that the admiration was mutual, that I had been drawn to her warmth and quiet strength since the first glance. Instead, I let my gaze meet hers, letting the honesty of my eyes convey what words might fail to capture. I like being around you," I said finally, my voice low, careful. You make ordinary moments feel important. She smiled softly, and in that smile, there was recognition, a shared understanding that we were acknowledging something delicate yet undeniable. She reached over, lightly resting her hand on the back of mine. The touch was fleeting, casual to anyone watching, yet charged with meaning. I felt a warmth spread through me, a tether connecting us without a single explicit gesture. We talked then, slowly and quietly, about small things, memories, past experiences, little fears, but each word carried weight, each glance deepened the connection. There was vulnerability in her openness and trust in the way she allowed herself to speak freely with me. The conversation never veered into romance in words, yet every subtle smile, every lingering look, every gentle brush of hands built an unspoken intimacy that felt electric. By the time the night deepened, the emotional bond between us had strengthened palpably. Sitting there, side by side in the soft moonlight, I realized that this was more than a fleeting connection. It was a careful, quiet intertwining of hearts and minds, a slow, deliberate deepening of trust and affection. In that moment, I understood that what we had was rare, a closeness that transcended age, circumstance, and expectation, and that would continue to grow, quietly, deliberately, and beautifully. The following morning carried a gentle calm, the kind of soft light that filtered through the blinds and filled the kitchen with a comforting warmth. I had arrived early, as usual, and found her sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in hand, the steam curling up in delicate wisps. She looked up and smiled, that same effortless smile that had first caught my attention weeks ago, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, familiar yet somehow transformed. We sat together quietly, the soft clatter of spoons against mugs punctuating the comfortable silence. Every glance, every subtle gesture carried the weight of the connection we had built, unspoken, but undeniably present. When she leaned closer to pour cream into my coffee, our hands brushed lightly. It was a simple touch, but it lingered, warming my skin, echoing the tenderness of our shared moments. Later, we found ourselves in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch. The sunlight fell in gentle stripes across the carpet, highlighting the relaxed curve of her shoulders and the soft fall of her hair. We talked about ordinary things, the neighbor's garden, a recipe she had tried the night before, but beneath the surface, every word held subtle intimacy. Our conversation was gentle, unhurried, like two people who had discovered a rhythm together, a quiet understanding that needed no explanation. Occasionally, our hands brushed, fingers accidentally entwining for a heartbeat before we pulled away with small smiles. I caught myself studying the warmth in her eyes, the delicate curve of her lips, the faint flush of her cheeks when she laughed softly at something trivial. There was no urgency, no pressure, only the slow, deliberate unfolding of trust and affection. Each moment felt precious, each gesture meaningful, as if the universe had carved out this quiet space for just the two of us. When it came time for me to leave, we lingered near the door. Her hand rested briefly on my arm, a grounding touch that said more than words ever could. I felt the steady warmth of her presence, a comforting tether that made stepping out into the world feel both natural and a little bittersweet. As I walked away, I realized that our relationship had reached a delicate balance, one of trust, affection, and quiet intimacy. We had created a connection that transcended age and circumstance, a bond that was profound yet restrained, exciting yet safe. The moments we had shared, from the smallest brush of hands to the softest smiles, had woven themselves into a fabric of trust and mutual understanding. And as the sun rose higher, illuminating the suburban streets with its golden light, I carried with me a sense of contentment and anticipation. What we had was private, cherished, and enduring, a slow-burning connection that would continue to grow, quietly, beautifully, and entirely our own. If you felt the tension, the secrets, and the quiet moments between them, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more slow-burn romances that tug at your heart. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in his shoes? And turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that makes your heart race in the most subtle way.